For many people, it's hard to think about Christianity without thinking of something called sin. Some Christians talk about sin a lot. They talk about avoiding sin and getting their sins forgiven. I have noticed it up around where we live. If you go to any kind of family dinner, or sometimes we go to some of the church dinners around up there at those little churches, when they get asked the blessing of the meal, 99% of the time when they ask the blessing of the meal, they'll also put a phrase in there, asking God to forgive us for all our sins. Now, what exactly is sin? Christians have argued over that since the beginning. If you go to the dictionary and look up sin, you'll see it says a transgression of a religious or moral law, a transgression of a divine law. And so based on that, many Christians look at sin as transgressing the laws of God. And the idea is that God has a list of do's and don'ts, and when you violate that list, that is a sin. Now that idea has support from the Bible. 1 John chapter 3 says, sin is the transgression of the law. And so that would seem to say, well, that's what sin is. The problem is that verse doesn't define what the law is. We assume it means God's law, but what exactly is that? Is it the 10 Commandments? Is it the 600 and something odd rules and regulations found in the Old Testament? Or for Christians, is God's law something different? What exactly is God's law? You know, the Bible never just clearly lines out, this is God's law, and listing that. It never does that. Now, there's another place in the Bible that could be seen as a definition of sin. This is also in 1 John. It says, all unrighteousness is sin. Well, that doesn't tell us much. It doesn't define unrighteousness. So we go to the dictionary and we look up unrighteousness, and it says, not acting in accordance with divine or moral law. So that's got the same definition as sin. So unrighteousness is sin. Sin is unrighteousness. We've gone around in a circle and never figured out what it is. Now that's been a problem in Christianity since the very beginning. Nowhere in the Bible does it clearly line out the laws we're supposed to follow. There is not a comprehensive list. Do this, don't do that in the Bible. Now, since the Bible does not specifically lay it out, it's not surprising that different Christians have come up with different lists of what exactly constitutes sin. There are disagreements within Christianity about what a sin is. And that's one of the major things that divides Christians today, disagreement over what a sin is. Now, most Christians take the position that things we would consider immoral behavior like murder, rape, burglary, most Christians all consider that those are sins. Those are the obvious things. They're like crimes. You could go to jail for murder or rape. The problem is that only a tiny percentage of the population is going to murder or rape people or burglarize somewhere. Most people don't do that. You know, just a tiny, tiny fraction of our population is going to do things like that. Most people don't. The disagreement in Christianity is what else is on the list. The list that most of us might be tempted to do. Now, one group of Christians says that that list includes things like sex outside of marriage, pornography. For some, it includes drinking alcohol, gambling, smoking marijuana, using foul language. And they say that these are immoral behaviors you must avoid. And if you avoid doing those things, then you're in pretty good shape. You're considered one of the righteous. There are other Christians, though, who have a different list here. Sin for them is not advocating for justice. It's not voting for certain political candidates. It's not accepting any kind of sexual activity between two consenting minors. It's not beating yourself over the head because of the evils your ancestors have done. So sin to these people is still violating a list of laws. It's just that their laws are different. And you might have noticed that the laws this group don't want you to violate are more social than personal in nature. So if you participate in protests and marches, if you write letters to your representatives urging them to do something about the plight of some group of people in some country somewhere, if you vote for the right person in elections, if you stand in solidarity for whoever happens to be marching around saying they're oppressed now, then you're doing good. You're doing good. You're one of the righteous. So far we've talked about two very different ideas of what sin is that two very different groups of Christians have. Seems like they're miles apart with each other. Both groups agree that sin is violating the laws of God. It's just they don't agree what the laws of God are. And that has been the case in Christianity since the very beginning. Different groups of Christians have come up with different lists of sins that we're supposed to avoid doing. Now, there are places in the Bible that warn us against certain behaviors, and I think we ignore those at our own peril. However, instead of concentrating on sin so much, I'd like for us to go in a different direction. I don't think sin is where the main emphasis is if you want to live a righteous Christian life. If you go to the Gospels and look at the things Jesus said, you'll see Jesus did not talk a lot about the sins like we've talked about today from either group's list of sin. When I look at the teachings of Jesus, I look at it as more as he's talking about our attitude. Specifically, our attitude toward other people. The largest single collection of teachings of Jesus in the Bible is the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew. We heard part of that as our gospel lesson. You'll see that Jesus is talking about how you act toward other people. He talks about not being angry at other people. He talks about doing things for other people, loving your enemies, doing things from the goodness of your heart, not from publicity or praise. He talks about not putting on airs, forgiving other people. Don't concentrate on building up your worldly wealth. He said not to worry. Don't judge other people. Do unto others as you would have them do to you. That's not really a list of do's and don'ts that matches very well with either of the groups' list of do's and don'ts we talked about earlier. And that's why I think that what Jesus was talking about comes down to more about attitude toward other people. We should not have an attitude of judgment toward other people. Hatred. Thinking of ourselves as superior to them. We should see other people as we see ourselves. In fact, Jesus did tell us that the way we treat other people will determine how God treats us. Jesus says, if we forgive others, God will forgive us. If we do not forgive others, God will not forgive us. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus said, give and it will be given to you. With the same measure you give, it will be given back toward you. How we act toward others determines how God acts toward us. What we send out toward others determines what God sends to us. In Matthew 7, Jesus said, judge not so that you will not be judged. For with what judgment you judge, you shall be judged. Now usually when we think of judging, we think of condemning someone for something they've done. But judging involves more than condemning. In fact, the danger of judging is really not condemning. The real danger of judging means that when we judge, we try to determine what a person is worthy of. You think of a judge hearing a case in a courtroom. That judge is going to judge someone either guilty or not guilty. But really what the judge is doing is judging what the person deserves. Did they do the crime and deserve punishment, or did they not do the crime and not deserve punishment? That's what judging really entails. Judging what someone is worthy of. When we judge people, what we're really doing is saying that they are not worthy of our love, our concern, our respect, and our help. And I think that's what Jesus was warning us from. Don't judge people and put them in the unworthy classification. Remember, Jesus did say that as we judge, so will we be judged. And you know, that's where a lot of people get in trouble. I have my list of sins that I don't think people should do. And then I see somebody violate one of those, and I judge them. And I think, well, you know, that's okay. God can judge me because I don't do that. You know, whatever they're doing, I don't do it, so I judge them for it. If God judges me by the same standard, fine. I don't do it, so I'm okay. That's how a lot of people look at it, frankly. The thing about judging, though, is not that we judge people as guilty. The thing about judging is that we judge them as being unworthy. We judge them as being unworthy of our concern, our care, our love, and our respect. And then what do? We toss them aside as if they were there. And that's dangerous. Because if you take what Jesus said seriously when we do that, that's what God's going to do to us. Our judgment on them that they are unworthy and that we can toss them aside and that they don't matter, is that how we want God to look at us? That's the way it works. You take what Jesus said seriously. We may judge this person that was caught with child pornography as a horrible sinner. We may judge them as unworthy, as someone we have no respect for, as someone we wouldn't help if they were laying there starving to death, as someone we have no respect for, as someone we hate. And we might feel justified in doing that because we don't do child pornography. But when we judge someone as unworthy for whatever reason, we're putting ourselves in a dangerous situation because we risk being judged unworthy ourselves. That does not mean we say that child pornography is okay. It means that instead of saying she got caught with child pornography, therefore she is not worthy of my concern and she doesn't matter and I'm going to toss her out. No, it means saying she got caught with child pornography, but she is still worthy of concern, help, love. Hard to do. But if we take Jesus seriously, remember, in more than one place, he says that how we treat others and look at others and judge others will determine how God judges us. But we don't do that to earn something from God. In Matthew 18, Jesus talked about forgiving other people, but he talked about it specifically, forgive others your heart. You see, the important thing is that we do it because we want to. Because deep down, that's what we want to do. The important thing is that in our heart, we feel concern, love, and respect. Not because of what they do, not because of what they don't do, but simply because that's what we feel about. It's not that sins are not important. They are. They are. There are things the Bible tells us not to do. It's not a comprehensive list, but there are things the Bible tells us not to do. And as I said, I think we ignore those at our peril. But I think what is even more important is our attitude, not judging people as unworthy. When we look at people who we think sin, do we see people who are unworthy, who don't matter, and who should just be tossed aside? Or do we see people who, in spite of their sins, are worthy of our love and care and respect? You see what Jesus told us, and what's so difficult about living as Jesus wants us to live, is that it's not just following a list of do's and don'ts. It has to do with what's deep in your heart. It has to do with your attitude. You can follow to the letter everything the Bible says not to do, and that's good. That's what you should do. But in the final analysis, I think it matters even more what your attitude toward other people is, how you view other people deep in your heart, even the people who you are absolutely sure are horrible sinners. Of all the messages people in our society need to hear today, I can think of none. They need to hear more. Look out in our society, what's going on. We have politicians who refer to entire swaths of our population as a basket of deplorable. What do we see during the coronavirus? We saw those who rebelled against the closings, the mask mandates, and the forced vaccinations as trash, as disposables to be hated. And in fact, the government, the medical establishment, and even some kind of churches encourage people to shun and hate those who didn't go along. And they were shunned and hated. We saw times when people went back into our history and picked out those who didn't line up with their standards that they have developed, and they decided those people are not worthy to be in our history, and so they removed them. And people went on with it. Go on. We live in a society today where the left encourages hate against those who will not go with the leftist agenda. Those who won't go with the leftist agenda are trash and do not matter. By the same token, the right encourages hate against those who won't go along with the rightist agenda. If you won't go along with the rightist agenda, you can be hated and you don't matter. You see what's happening? We have a society divided down a line, and we're at each other's throats. Both sides at each other's throats. It's like a bunch of little insects fighting against each other. And all the while all this is going on down here, evil marches on, and nobody pays any attention. You see, we're so engrossed in our petty little squabbles that have been engineered to occupy us so that we don't see the steady march of evil. We're so engaged in petty little squabbles that we don't see how, while we're bashing it out with each other, our whole society is being destroyed. Few even notice it, and most will not notice it until it's too late. Do you think that's a coincidence? Or do you think that's Satan at work in the world? He set us against each other and engineered us to hate and fight against each other while he marches on. Isn't that what's going on? We engage in our little squabbles while evil keeps taking over. And we don't concentrate on the big things because we're so busy fighting each other on the little things. It's like kindergarten children. He stole my piece of cake. That's what's going on in our society today. While our society is being destroyed. And while Christianity is being destroyed. And we don't notice it. Because it's been engineered to make us fight together. So we'll be preoccupied. We don't see the big picture. We're just concerned about the little petty squabbles. How do we break out of this? It's very simple. Jesus told us 2,000 years ago what we need to do. We need to quit judging other people as unworthy. Whether you agree with me or not. Whether you live like I think you should or not. Whether you vote like I think you should or not. Whatever you do in your life. I have no right to judge you as unworthy, and I have no right to say you do not matter. I have no right to toss you aside and say you're nothing but a deplorable and that you don't matter. No right whatsoever. Jesus told us that 2,000 years ago. If we quit spending all of our time judging others and tossing them aside as unworthy, maybe we could see and try to withstand against the real evils that are overtaking us.